Hello, guys. Welcome to this edition of the Titan Sports Update. I'm interviewing Ryan Lefebvre here, and I'm Matt Ross. So let's get going. So, how did you get the job as the Royals play-by-play man?
Well, I'll start in Minnesota. And in 1993, the Fox network, Fox Sports, got the rights to the NFL. Now, for people your age, that's no big deal because you probably watch the NFL on Fox all the time. But when I was this would have been in my early 20s, ABC, NBC, and CBS were the only networks that did sports. So two of the networks would have the NFL, like now CBS has the Chiefs games and Fox does the NFC. But back then, two networks would have it and one network wouldn't have it. Well, the rights would come up and a network would outbid another one, so the rights would shift, and the new network would just hire the announcers that were on the old network. I mean, they were just recycling these announcers. So here comes Fox out of nowhere. Fox wasn't a big player at all. They get the rights to the NFL, and they don't hire all these old-time broadcasters. They hire guys like Joe Buck, who was 24 years old at the time, a guy named Tom Brenneman, who was in his mid to late 20s. They wanted a young voice, and the industry looked at that, and it really kind of shook up not just the network but the regions like Fox Sports Kansas City. The next year, Fox got the rights to Major League Baseball, and they did the same thing. They hired young announcers. So broadcasting is like every other industry. If someone's successful, everyone else tries to copy it. So all of a sudden, so you got the big networks, then you got the regional networks. The regional networks started saying, well, maybe we need to have a younger person on our broadcast. They wanted to attract a younger audience. And I think they felt like old announcers are not going to appeal to a younger audience. You got to get a younger announcer. So that's a big setup to, I was 24 years old. I had some experience. I've been working for probably about a year and a half in Minneapolis. I had played baseball at the University of Minnesota. I had experience. My dad, Jim Lefebvre, was still a major league coach at the time. So Lefebvre's it's a unique name, and if you've heard it before, you probably would associate it with baseball. So the Minnesota Twins and their network decided they needed a young guy. And I mean, I literally was in the right place at the right time. I'd love to tell you that I was the best 24-year-old broadcaster in the country, or let alone Minnesota, and really I wasn't. I was right there. So they gave me a shot at 24. And I was kind of like the fill-in announcer, and I also did pregame and postgame on TV, very similar to what Joel Goldberg does for the Royals. And then after 4 years, I got an opportunity to come to Kansas City. And really, I interviewed in Kansas City just because I was trying to improve my contract situation back in Minnesota. It was a leverage move more than anything else. But I came to Kansas City, and I realized it was maybe time for me to move on. And so I came to the Royals in 1999, so this is my 17th year.
So explain one of the greatest moments that you've ever had as a sports broadcasting for the Royals.
For the Royals, okay. Well, the obvious one would be the wild card game last year. And it was a great game. It was a play-in game to the playoffs. The Royals hadn't been to the postseason in 29 years. They were down by 4 runs in the 8th inning. I mean, it's just there were so many little stories that made up the big story. And so when I do the games on radio with Denny Matthews, when we go into the extra innings, I do the even innings and he does the odd innings. So I would do the 10th and the 12th and the 14th, and he would do the 11th and the 13th and the 15th. We just go back and forth in the extra innings. So as fate would have it, I got to call Salvador Perez's base hit in the 12th inning. I also had responsibilities to do the TV postgame show on Fox Sports Kansas City. So the game is over. I see very little to celebration. I got to throw my sport coat on, and I got to get out to rival sports bar at Kauffman Stadium as quickly as I can to begin the television postgame show. So I call the play. I'm going out of the booth, and what I will probably remember more than anything else from that game, and really from the playoff experience in 2014, is I had to go through the crowd to get there, and I'd never seen so many just delirious people with enthusiasm that they couldn't contain. I mean, they were high-fiving each other, they were hugging each other, they were kissing each other, they were screaming, they were pumping their fists in the air. I mean, it was like 29 years of frustration, just bottled up everyone just let it out. And I mean, I just remember sitting back and just watching this, and it really hit me because I think as a broadcaster, I think it's not just a broadcaster, but anybody in their position, it's very easy for me to just get caught up in my little world. Like, what does this mean to me as a broadcaster? And I think that was the first time that I realized what this meant to Kansas City, what this meant to fans, what it meant to the region, how big that win was, and how long people had waited. And I went through that crowd mostly unnoticed. There were 2 or 3 fans that did notice me on my way out to Rivals. And all 3 of them came up and they hugged me and they said, thank you so much. Like I had done something. I didn't do anything. I mean, Salvador Perez won the game.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there are quite a few moments that were exciting, goosebump type of moments. But I think that one, it wasn't just the game, but it was just that experience of walking through the crowd and seeing how important a sports team is to a community.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the Royals have revived almost this community and bring it all together. And that would probably be my moment too. Just watching that ball sneak past Donaldson glove, like that just gave me chills.
Yeah.
Like, all my years, I wasn't even alive when we won it last year.
Right.
So, just that moment too. That really I think that captured the whole city.
Right. And Kansas City hasn't been the same since.
Really not. So now some of the great moments. What's been one of the worst moments that you've had?
Well, the easy answer would be all those 100 lost seasons. But when I look back on those years, I'm grateful for those years because what I've learned now when the Royals have been good, and as you and I are talking, it's the day after a 14-inning win over the Mets in Game 1 of the World Series, and we're getting ready for Game 2. And what I've learned is that when the games are big and the team is doing well, broadcasting a game actually is quite easy because as long as we're given the score and we're given the count and we're telling you what's going on, I mean, that's all the fans want.
Yeah.
They don't want to hear a story about, when Johnny was in high school, he had a coach that used to make him stay up all night and, hit bottle caps up against a screen and for hand-eye coordinate. They're like, who cares about it? I mean, tell me what's going on with the game. And when the Royals were bad and the game really, and I don't care what anyone says, the games really had very little meaning because they meant nothing in the standings. But for me as a broadcaster, I had to learn more about the players. I had to learn more about the team. I had to have some material. So when it's 7-1 Twins in the 4th inning, how am I going to keep Matt engaged with what's going on with the game? Because right now the game means nothing. The Royals are not going to win the game.
Yeah.
But what could I tell Matt about Mike Sweeney? And what's Mike Sweeney working on? Or what can I tell Matt about a young player who's just been called up and his adjustment to the major leagues? Or what can I tell Matt about a pitcher who's really struggled lately, but he's figured out what's his struggles are all about, and here are the adjustments he's trying to make. So let's see if he can make that adjustment with this hitter. So it made me a better broadcaster because I had to do more than just, ball 1, strike 1, 2-0 Royals in the 4th inning. I mean, I really had to develop. So I could answer your question by saying those bad years, but at the same time, I'm grateful for those years because I wouldn't be who I am today without going through that.
So, watching the Royals through the struggle years, did you ever think they were going to make it to the playoffs with that team?
I wanted them to. I'm older now. I'm 44 years old, and most of the players are in their 20s. Players now in their mid-30s are considered old guys, and I'm quite a bit older than they are. But when I came to Kansas City, I was 27, 28 years old, so I was very close in age with Mike Sweeney and Joe Randa and Jermaine Dye, Jeff Suppan, and so I wanted those guys to win personally because they became my friends, and so I wanted those teams to win because I know, and specifically Mike Sweeney, I knew how badly he wanted to win. I knew how badly Joe Randa wanted to win. I mean, they moved to Kansas City and they became Kansas Cityans. Would they make it to the playoffs? There were just too many holes on those teams. When they were hitting, they weren't pitching. When they were pitching, they weren't hitting. And it really took an overhaul of the entire organization. And when David Glass hired Dayton Moore, and Dayton Moore convinced Mr. Glass to just completely rebuild from the bottom up, even now, if we had this interview 2 years ago,
Uh-huh.
you said, do you think the Royals can go to a World Series? It's hard to go to the World Series. I mean,
It is.
first of all, you got to win the division. You have to be better than every other team in your division for 6 months, and which is I think it's harder to win the division than it is the playoffs.
Definitely.
In the playoffs, you just have to be good for 2 weeks, and in the Royals' case, they have to be better than 3 teams for 2 weeks, a little more than 2 weeks. In the regular season, you got to be better than 4 teams for 6 months. So if you had asked me, could the Royals get to the World Series? I mean, I wouldn't know because I'd never experienced the playoffs. If you'd asked me, can the Royals get to back-to-back World Series, I would say you're crazy,
Yeah.
And I think I think you have to have the mentality if you're a player or a coach or you're the general manager, you have to have the mentality that that's possible. But, the best teams in baseball don't get. The best teams year after year after year don't get to the World Series in back-to-back years. So, it is really remarkable what's going on. I think someday we're going to look back and say that was something.
Yeah.
But right now we're all just kind of caught up in it, and it's it's almost overwhelming.
It is. We're living in history right now.
Right.
And
It's like
when you look
a
back,
dream.
Yeah. When you look back, you're gonna tell your kids about it. But when we got Kane and Escobar and Salvi was building in the minors, and so was Hosmer and Moose. Did you kind of see them develop and think, I think we're gonna be better, or do you think you saw like better development than last year's teams?
I'll be honest, Matt, I was skeptical because the years prior to that, we had heard about great players in the minor leagues. And when they got there, nothing really happened.
Yeah.
Until we got to Billy Butler and Alex Gordon. That was the first time that, okay, we've produced some impact players from the minor leagues. And so when people in our front office would talk about Moustakas and Hosmer and Kane and Duffy and Holland, all these guys coming up, my first reaction, just being a human being, was, okay, well, let's see, because I've heard this before. But what was different was when other scouts on other teams would come to me and say, boy, you guys are loaded. You got a lot of really good players in the farm system. Because every team believes that their young players are going to be good.
Yeah.
They have to believe their young players are good.
True.
Right? Because if they're not, if you don't believe in your own players, what are you going to do?
Yeah, you gotta sell
So
them.
I think every team believes their young players are good. But when other teams, unsolicited, it's not like I'd go to Joe Blow Scout with the Tigers and say, what do you think of our farm system? Joe Blow Scout with the Tigers would come to me and say, man, you got some players down in that minor league system. So that's when it started to feel different. And when they got here, their demeanor was different. They were rookies and they needed to learn, but they had a presence about them where you could tell that they felt like they belonged. They weren't overwhelmed by the crowds, and they weren't overwhelmed by the attention. They weren't caught up in certain situations. So there was something special about them. But, to go from 90 losses to 10 games above 500 to the World Series to the World Series, I don't know if anybody could have predicted that.
Yeah, it just kept building and building. And I remember as a kid that I read an article about the Royals will win the World Series in set years and the farm system. And just seeing those players build up, and I went to the games back when the tickets were cheap and you could get, great seats. And I saw them develop too. So I know as a fan, on the fan's perspective, I saw those guys and they're a little bit different than Billy Butler. And Alex Gordon's still a great player nonetheless. And he's probably the heart and soul of the Royals other than Salvador Perez. But seeing Alex Gordon hit that home run last night, I feel like it's all surreal too.
Yeah.
So it really is deserving for the fans. If you had one thing to say to anyone who doesn't believe the Royals would have made it this far, what would you say?
Well, I think most of the people who believe they wouldn't get this far are the people that just concentrate on the numbers. The statistical gurus look at this team and, they predicted they'd win 72 games this year.
Yeah.
Because, you can take all of this data and put it in a computer and it's going to tell you how the Royals are going to do. And the Royals have something that are beyond the numbers, which is very difficult to understand unless you've been there, unless you've been on a team to understand what chemistry means. There's only so much you can, as I say, there's only so much you can learn about the game in a lab coat with test tubes. The science is there, but sometimes there's no science. It's no different from what you guys are doing.
Yeah.
You and Dylan and Isaiah, doing the show, you've been coming, you know each other, you've gone to school together, so if one of you isn't doing a good job, you're comfortable enough in saying, hey, we need to do better at this, or, you need to change the lighting, or I want I want this to sound better, or they might say to you, Matt, hey, next time when you're doing an interview, ask this, and you're going to trust them because they're your friends. And now let's say, rivalries aside, I replaced 2 of your guys with a guy from Lee Summit and a guy from Lee Summit North. They might be really talented, they might be good guys, but there's going to be this, okay, what's your agenda? What's your agenda? You know, are we all in this together, or is this about you? Or I'm not comfortable, or wait, you don't criticize me.
Yeah.
Some guy from North doesn't come in here and criticize me. And the same thing happens on a baseball team. And so you got all these guys that came up together. They're talented. They like playing. I don't think I've ever been around a group that likes playing baseball together as much as this group does. They encourage each other, but they also call each other out. They hold each other accountable. And so, to your question, someone who says, well, the Royals, they can't get to the playoffs because they don't score enough runs. They don't hit enough home runs.
Yeah.
Their starting rotation isn't strong enough. And there might be some evidence that's true, but it's like, well, but you need to go in the clubhouse and see how these guys, the pieces just work. Alcides Escobar, the numbers will tell you he is not a leadoff hitter. But when he leads off, the Royals win.
Yeah.
There's no scientific reason for it. It just works. And that drives numbers people crazy because there's no formula. But again, that's something that just needs to be experienced when you're part of a team, that just certain things work and there's no equation that tells you why.
Yeah. Okay. So what do you think is in store for us as fans in Kansas City? What do you think is in store for the future?
Well, I think they're going to win for a long time. I can't tell you how many times they're going to go to the playoffs. I can't tell you how many times they're going to go to the World Series, but I think they're going to be competitive for a long time. What's going to be interesting moving forward is there's going to be some difficult decisions to make, and decisions that the fans aren't going to like. I mean, the Royals are going to have to start trading away some popular players eventually, I don't know when, to just keep the farm system replenished. You know, there are salary limitations because of the market the Royals are in. They can't pay like the Dodgers or the Yankees pay because there's just not enough revenue coming in. Without getting too technical, the interesting case study for me is the Minnesota Twins. Minnesota Twins at one point they won 6 divisions in 9 years. That's pretty good. That's hard to do. 6 divisions in 9 years. And they did it like the Royals with a lot of homegrown players. They traded away a guy because they knew another guy was coming up. Then they moved into a new stadium and they were just printing money. I mean, money was falling out of the sky in this new stadium. And they decided to sign all of their main players to long-term contracts. And guys got hurt, they underperformed, and now they're stuck with all this money. They can't afford to go out and fix the team. And it buried the Minnesota Twins for several years. They went from really good to really bad for a long time. So when the time comes for Dayton Moore and Mr. Glass, they have to ask themselves, do we want to put all of our chips in the center of the table? Do we want to go for it all with the risk that if it doesn't work out, we could be bad for a while, and then you got to rebuild, and you got to wait several years, not 29 years, but you got to several years to build it back up? Or do you take the Minnesota Twins or other teams' point of view where you try and stay good for a long period of time and hope that when you get into the playoffs, you get on a roll? Minnesota never got on a roll. They never got to the World Series during that stretch. They only made it to the championship series once during that stretch. But they went to the playoffs 6 times in 9 years. They gave themselves a chance.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's the big question ahead, and maybe not even next year, but maybe the year after that, where the Royals have to decide, do we want to go for it all every now and then we have to pick up the pieces and rebuild it, or do we want to stay good every year and just hope that, you know, they catch fire when the playoffs come around?
All right. So, if I knew you better, what would be one question that I would ask you?
If you knew me better, what would be a question that you would ask me? That is a very interesting question. You would probably say, did you get any sleep last night? I have 4 kids, age 5 and under, 3 of which are boys, and they are animals. And so as we're speaking, we had a 14-inning game last night that went 5 hours and 9 minutes. Exciting game.
Yeah, nonetheless.
Then we had a 1-hour post-game show on television, and then I had to drive home, and I had to get to bed. It was probably about 2:30 when I got to bed. And then I had 2 little kids getting up early, much earlier than I wanted to get up this morning. and jumping on the bed, and they're hungry and they want to get ready for school. And then we have another World Series game tonight, and then we fly to New York, and I'll probably get to the hotel at about 4 in the morning on Thursday. And so nowadays, sleep doesn't come as much as I would like. So, and if you knew me better, you would know that I love my job. I really, truly feel blessed to have this job. I can't tell you that I'm one of the best, broadcasters, in Kansas City, let alone in the major leagues.
Yeah.
But for some reason, I was put in this position to broadcast Major League Baseball, and I'm very grateful. And at the same time, it's just a small part of who I am. I mean, my family and my friends and my faith, and I mean that's much more important to me. And so I think that surprises people when they get to know me, that I'm not as consumed with baseball and consumed with being a broadcaster as people might assume. There was a time before I got married when it was way too big in my life, and I had to figure out how to get some balance. But so I mean that's an important part of my life, but there's another side. So I think if you knew me better, you'd probably ask me, how are the kids doing? Are you getting any sleep? How's your wife holding up with you being on the road? Are you looking forward to some time off and getting reconnected with my friends and my church and my family? And that's one of the great things about my job is, I'm very busy for at least 7 months, if you include spring training. And when we go to the World Series, it's 8 months. And then the other 4 months, I can kind of step back and decompress and just be a normal guy and be home and be a husband and be a father and be a friend. Hey, West fans, as you take care of the Kickapoo Chiefs, the Royals will be kicking the poo out of the Mets. Go Titans.